So today we're going to be talking again about interoperability for your market advantage. That's again more towards the vendor and thinking your market advantage as a vendor, but also for the districts, how can I help vet these ed tech tools when thinking about interoperability. And a tool that Project Unicorn has created is the interoperability rubric. So this rubric really helps schools and districts see how an ed tech tool can measure against the key concerns and criteria like privacy and security. And again, I'm going to show you Project Unicorn resources today, but there are also other certifications and badges out there, and that's what we're going to center the panel discussion around, and just the importance of getting certified or getting badges for vendors, and then also for districts to use these verification methods when they're thinking about the ed tech tools that they're procuring. So 2 ways this rubric can be used, and again, you can either pull up the slides or there's the link at the bottom. The text is really small on the rubric, but it's good to take a look at it on our actual page. But this is something that you can use as a district when you're vetting those ed tech tools. And then if you're a vendor, you can use this rubric just to even kind of think about where do we sit and what should we work towards to get higher on that rubric so our product is more interoperable. So this rubric it says V3, it changes as the market changes. It's in its 3rd iteration, and it's meant to be live or just a living document that can change as the market changes. And this was an effort to create a shared language for school districts and states and vendors. And as we said, it evaluates those key aspects of interoperability. And it's something that you can also use in RFPs. So somebody to consider if you're an LEA or an SEA and you're putting out RFPs, you can use this rubric as a tool. So going back here, again, this is like what the rubric looks like, and it breaks down with really small text and to be very specific. But these are the different rows, we can say, are the things that are measured on the rubric. So we have data quality, data granularity, export, processed, cost transparency, and cost. You also have that for import. So the import, cost transparency, cost, process. There's security, frequency, format, and then the technical descriptions and examples. So these are the things that you will find on the rubric as you're taking a look. And this rubric is what informs the certification. So has anyone heard of the Project Unicorn Interoperability Certification? A couple of people, great. So this is a badge, and I really want, again, our panel to center around just thinking through, as a vendor, the certifications and the badges that are out there. This is something that's going to continue to be more and more important, that there are those validators and those people, not just the vendor saying, yeah, we do this, but there's someone who is validated to say, yes, they are interoperable, they do what they say that they do. So this certification, it's a free certification that you can apply for. It signals that your EdTech product prioritizes data interoperability. This is something I'm going to go to the next level. Just to show you a little bit more of what the certification looks like. So it is based again off of the rubric, and you are ranked from a level of interoperability on a scale from 1 to 4, 4 being the highest. And this is also, again, something for the SEAs and the LEAs. This is something you can demand of your EdTech vendors and to think about when you are creating those RFPs, when you're thinking about your procurement, how you can use not just this certification and badge to your advantage, but just in general badges and certifications. A couple places for the Project Unicorn certification that it is displayed on, so it's on the EdSearch Product Index, your badge will be there, as well as the Learn platform. It might also be displayed in a couple other places that SEAs, LEAs, and collaboratives are procuring their ed tech, but this is right now the 2 places that you see it in. And these are what the badges look like. So a few really good things. We talked about, why this is so important, but this is really great for visibility on those indexes, especially if you're looking for ways to, free ways even, in our case this badge is free, to get some visibility. And this is something that you get an open badge, and it's your badge to keep. You can put it on your website, and you can also market. I remember going to one conference, and I think it was maybe the state of California, they were saying that vendors use things like their privacy and security, interoperability to actually market their product, because in those states it's so important. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen to talk a little bit more about Infinite Campus, and then we'll do our panel questionnaire.
Great, thanks Chloe. So Infinite Campus actually ran into Chloe at a conference, I don't know, probably a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, just starting to learn what Project Unicorn was. And she's like, well, you guys are a great candidate to become a badge because you guys, are already certified in the data standards in order to, to work in the States. So I focused on our Ed5 journey. I mean, obviously, as Chloe showed, there's other standards, but I really wanted to focus on our Ed5 journey since we're here. So it was really interesting. We talked, if anybody was at this data state session this morning too, we kind of talked, Eric kind of had a similar map that said the same thing. So back in 2015 to 2019, we really focused on, we had the 4 main states that did an Ed5 integration. So it was Arizona, Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Then we hit 2021, and then we went through a big version update in Ed5 from the 2.0 to the 3.1, which was a really big lift for vendors and the early adopters of the Ed5 data standard. But then, so coming into that 3.x, and then we had, Minnesota and Indiana starting their journeys into the Ed5 roadmap. And then in 2022, everything kind of came to a screaming halt with the pandemic. But this was what was really great about interoperability and using the data standard is when kids got sent home, all of us vendors in the room, CIS vendors in the room, Department of Education's, all got on the phone together and said, how are we going to, do digital equity for these kids to understand how we're going to best serve them when they're at home for a couple of years. And being already certified vendor in data standards and interoperability allowed all of us, because we had already made that commitment to interoperability, to create a data model where we can get that data sent into a single source area at once. And it was just a really rewarding and an amazing experience. And being a committed vendor for all of us in the room really made that happen. So it really shows the benefits and how you can get to data quicker, faster, and easier. So then we have now more states coming on as we see. You can see the continued growth through the Ed5 data model. So what this did for us as a company, we know that every state is kind of a snowflake and does their own thing, but it allowed us to create a foundation of interoperability through our student information system, through these data standards. And so now what we're seeing is a new trend in the marketplace, which is now at the LEA level, they're trying to get into interoperability to get to see their data and do visualizations. So while it really started from a state reporting trend, we're now seeing the market shift now into, districts themselves wanting to be using interoperability for moving data, across all of their own systems, partnering with managed service providers that are doing great work with visualizations and all their other fun, cool tools that, we don't do in the student information system. So it's been a challenging journey. I'm not going to say that it's always easy, but it really is, great rewarding work. And so that was great when we were able to partner with Project Unicorn to be that certified vendor in the space too. So.
Thank you. Yeah, so for education analytics, our origin story is, we're functionally, the word analytics is a word we take very seriously, and that's kind of how we came into this world of data interoperability. for the first 5, 6 years, 7 years of our history, we were in kind of like the picture on top. So, which is without interoperability, without EdFi, without One EdTech, without SEDS. Those are the three that we work with on the chart we showed. It's kind of like what you see above, which is, you know, we're trying to move data from place to place. Like sometimes you need a handcart, sometimes you need a car. Sometimes the roads are paved, sometimes the roads they're dirt roads, sometimes there is no road, and so you got to like clip your way through it. And so that's the world where we entered into the space of doing analytics work. And we're one of the original, like, and longest standing organizations that does like value-added modeling, where we try to look at the impact of teachers and school leaders on student growth. And so as we worked with states and districts across the country, we got data in all different formats, and we spent like 80–90% of our time sucking the data in, reformatting the data, trying to get in shape, and then doing the analytics. And a number of members of our team said, hey, there's got to be a better way. And that's when we got into the whole EdFi space. Now, when we showed up to EdFi, we were like, this is going to be great. It's going to look like the picture on bottom. It didn't quite look like that right away, right? So like we entered the space at about the time where y'all were doing mostly state stuff, and we were really interested in like this local use kind of thing. And I was like, okay, well, it's not quite there yet, but if we try hard enough, we're going to work our way through. And the standard has matured, the technology around it has matured, and at least if you're operating in the EdFi space, and the EdFi sources, we're starting to look a little bit more like, hey, train tracks between these different things. It's not quite all the way there, but we're getting there. And that's kind of like the grand vision. And we certainly are a deep believer, I'm going to skip this. We're a deep believer in the multiple standards, and they all have their different role. So you know, EdFi is great when you're talking about like SIS, by the way, I'm not really talking about the slide right now. But EdFi is great when you're talking about like SIS data and grading assessment data. But there are other standards that are useful for other purposes too. So like One EdTech stuff, like, you know, obviously one roster is ubiquitous. And so we're intrigued by that. And then states certainly care about SEDS, right? And so we're trying to see how we can support states in moving data from EdFi to SEDS. But this is kind of how we think about a typical implementation. And I usually tell an interoperability story in the sense that each thing has a purpose. And so we have source systems, things like the student information systems, assessments, other things like that. And our big goal in the world is like API-based communication between sources. We love the EdFi API. How much stuff can we move through it? So we, you know, we started by working with SIS data, and then we're like, oh gosh, there's all this other stuff like assessments. And a couple of members of our team developed some software. It's open source. It's called EarthMover and Lightbeam that helps you move things like assessments. And then EdFi is great because it's like a place where all your raw ingredients get stored. But then, like, you want to do analytics, and like EdFi on its own doesn't. That's not the purpose. It's an operational data store. It stores your operational data. And so we did develop, some of our team members with an analytics lens developed Enable Data Union, which is functionally open source for states and districts, that transforms all this data into like a warehouse structure, and then you can do all the fun stuff in there. Oh, this slide just like didn't rock too well, but that's okay. I will just explain, like, for those of you who are thinking about like what's an EdFi journey like, this kind of gives you a flavor of what it looks like for a district. You do some planning stuff, you configure the EdFi environment. That's like super easy to do now. In fact, Starting Blocks, our EdFi software, is now open source. Anybody can go to our GitHub if you want to implement Starting Blocks yourself. SIS integration, this is where like the heavy lifting happens. And it happens for a couple of reasons. One is that like you have your own cleanup work to do. The other is that sometimes the mapping needs some effort. And then you get this nice clean data, and you can do fun stuff, and that's where the fun begins. So excited to answer some questions, but EA, yeah, our background is all about how can we make analytics easier. I'll share one quick thing, and then we'll go into questions. You know, we started this work in the space of trying to run these growth models, and I had a breakfast meeting this morning where we're talking about how we might do that in Texas at scale using EdFi and do it more inexpensively for districts who are trying to do teacher incentive allotment work, which is a huge opportunity for teachers to make more money and districts to bring in more resources. It's really cool to see that we're starting to come full circle and figuring out ways to leverage cleaner, interoperated data to do important analytic work for folks. So I'm happy to talk a little more about that, and I'm going to turn over to Chloe, who's going to ask us fun questions. Okay.
Okay, so we have a couple questions teed up, and I'm gonna pass them to our panel, but this is also like an open Q&A, so I'm gonna actually invite you just at any time, if you have questions, to raise your hand, and we can do some of these, some of your questions, or there's a slide that says Q&A, you can wait for that, whatever works best for you. But we're gonna start with this first question, and I think both of you got to this, but if you could just kind of like sum up the takeaway. So why do you and your company prioritize interoperability?
Yeah, the one part of the narrative I didn't tell was that, you know, I was, when EA started, Education Analytics started doing work in the EdFi interoperability space, I was actually contracting with EA as a collaborative in California called the Core Districts. And we had started this project that was about 9th grade on track and like continuous improvement, things like that. And I said, like, why can't you just, we had a system for bringing in file-based data on an annual basis, doing extracts from the state data system. I was like, why can't you just bring that data in once a quarter or once every few weeks, and can't the loaders work? And so I basically held Andrew, our CEO, hostage. I was like, dude, you gotta at least try it for me. And we did, and it was awful. It turns out that the files coming out of the SIS were not exactly the same in the middle of the year as the end of the year data. It turns out all kinds of funny stuff happens in the middle of the year. And so that was how we started our EdFi journey. And so we also as an organization said, hey, we see that there are vendors out there that just take data any way they can when it comes to downstream uses, but that would be very expensive. And you know, we believe that there should be interoperability standards and software, and so even if in the near term it feels more painful, we know that long term it's going to benefit everybody. And that's what we're starting to, actually, I really feel like the tide has turned. You've got implementations like South Carolina, and now the work happening in Texas, and Michigan, obviously, long-standing example. And the tide is really turning, and more states are getting into both state and local use using these standards. And that means that all of you that do downstream stuff should start to see a better ways to access data. But that's our story, and that's why we got into it.
Well, I'd like to be honest and say it was like my brilliant idea as a product manager to do this, but really it came into compliance reporting through our state initiatives. But like I said in my journey map, what that did is it gave us a hidden opportunity that we didn't realize back then. We were just like, oh, they're making us do this EdFi thing, and it's hard, and whatever. But as we grow as a community, what we're finding is we're now able to do the fun work that's part of this. And now that our states are stabilized, we understand it more. Now we can really focus on the core interoperability efforts and how do we expand that use into other areas now, like analytics, like data sharing between systems. Because that's just the future anyway. I mean, the more we become a technology society, the ideas of really you're going to give me a flat file with, you know, I mean, that's just not the way the world's going. And so we need to, you know, stay ahead of that trend.
All right, we'll start with Jen, the next one. How does making your products interoperable give an advantage to stand out in the market?
Really, you kind of sound like a broken record here, but it really is the idea that we can put these things into our product and make it seamless and integrated at a cheaper cost. I think one of the biggest, you know, we talk about this in the EdFi space all the time, one of the barriers to entry is that it's sometimes difficult to do and it can be expensive. Small districts, we know, make up the majority of our districts, you know, throughout the country. How can we as vendors work together to create these, you know, pipelines and these solutions that any district just can pick up and use and it works? And that's why being certified and going through these badging processes are so important, because you don't want a small district that doesn't have, you know, you have your principal, that's also your bus driver, that's also your, they wear so many hats. We want to make sure that we're putting the right solutions in place for the school districts to know that they're working with the right vendors, with the right people, and not going to be getting far down the line in a project and then have it fail or be a waste of time and money for them.
Yeah, education analytics, we're a nonprofit, but a nonprofit's a business too. It just has a different tax status and different rules about ownership. And so for us, it is a way to focus what market we're going to focus on. So we made a choice to make a big bet on EdFi. And so instead of trying, we're not very well known, I think, if you were to go to some of the giant ed tech conferences of the year. But here, we are pretty well known. And we've developed a reputation. And so for us, we kind of made the choice to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond. Helps us from a marketing perspective. It also happens to make business sense for our institution. And then for us, the other thing is we have worked very closely with state education agencies and local education agencies and education service agencies as a key partner. And I think they certainly care quite deeply about the issue of interoperability. And so it's the fact that it's our big focus has been a boon to our ability to market with those groups.
And then similarly, but now switching to the kind of certification and badges. So what is the benefit of getting certifications or badges as a vendor? If you have any stories, and it doesn't have to be Project Unicorn, it could be like EdFi certified or just any badges. Why did you all get certified, badged, as opposed to just doing, building to the thing and telling your customers, oh yeah, we can do that?
You talked about RFPs earlier, and I think I can speak, as many folks in this room know, once the RFP goes out, it's kind of silence, you can't do anything. But before it comes out, there's a lot of conversation with districts or education service agencies or states. And the badges give a way for, one thing that badging does, whether it's through Project Unicorn or EdFi, is it gives a mechanism to either give more points in an RFP or create a minimum requirement. And so instead of it just being like a generalized concept, it creates a structure to put into an RFP. So that certainly has happened for us. There have been RFPs that have had specific requirements, and you have conversations before RFPs go out, and you can say, hey, you might want to think about making this badge a requirement, or at least more points. And so that's certainly been a part of our journey. And I know that states and ESAs and districts who are buying heavily into whether it be the EdFi system or the Project Unicorn system are starting to look more and more at these badges as a way to differentiate vendors in the process.
Yeah, ditto to what Noah said, but also I think it's just the key piece is that, like the EdFi Alliance, in particular, puts due diligence into their vendors to make sure that what they say they do is what they do. And it takes the onus off of everybody else to have to verify that this vendor is actually compliant or can do these things that they say. And I think that's just the critical piece in this, is that you can take solace in knowing that somebody did their due diligence already and vetting out the vendors to make sure that they're qualified to work with.
Okay, and so thinking from the school district perspective, why or how are these certifications and badges important and or useful for school districts? How can they use it? How have you seen them use it? You mentioned RFPs, but any stories or ideas on how the school district could use it?
I think we're starting to see more movement in the school district arena. I mean, what we found that adoption of standards at like I said earlier, in small districts has been a challenge. We're trying to make a commitment to help change that. And again, when school districts are, it really goes to the RFP response as well. When they're maybe looking at vetting out a vendor for something and they want to create their own ecosystem, I want my SIS to make sure that they can talk to my assessment vendor, and my other, siloed systems throughout there. It just gets them to an answer quicker.
I think I would also just differentiate it between different kinds of school districts. So I think for your larger districts, like we do some projects with places like Boston and Denver, like they're keen to act almost like a state in some ways, and they're keen to they have all the pain of trying to interoperate data from lots of different sources and run these massive systems, whereas your smaller districts, they're just not mature enough to do that, they don't have the resources. And so in their case, I think they're looking a lot to their education service agencies or their state education agency. And that's really institutions that are looking at these badges and certifications as a way to identify vendors that they might work with. And I think a lot of those, either ESAs or large districts, they want to modernize, they want to go to the cloud, they want to use APIs instead of files. And the pathway to that is really through badged and certified solutions, whether they be using one EdTech type standards for certain things like using LTI or one roster, and then for other things using something like the EdFi standard, just depending on what the use case is.
This is an impromptu question for me, but could either of you answer, if you know off the top of your head, like other certifications and badges that more organizations have, so that maybe the vendors here are aware of the ones that are out there, what you prioritize, if you know.
If I'm being honest, we've mainly prioritized Project Unicorn and EdFi, and we're getting more and more into the one EdTech space. So one EdTech has things like one roster and LTI and stuff like that. That has to do with smaller amounts of data that move more quickly, whereas like EdFi is like your SIS and your assessments. It's like bigger sets of data that maybe you move less frequently. Those have been really important to us, and then Project Unicorn sort of amplifies all of that. We are also, as I mentioned earlier, because we're now starting to work with state education agencies, and for STAs, I think almost 40 states in the country have some affiliation with the SEDS standard. SEDS is that's like a federal data standard, and so we're also pretty heavily starting to work. I don't know if there's a badging process for SEDS though, so maybe y'all can work on that. But yeah.
Yeah, we're so in the three, so in the A4L, EdFi, Project Unicorn, we're all badged there. This also gave us an opportunity to be on the ISTE, EdSearch Product Index, which is a great tool for school districts to use to find certified vendors in the marketplace that have been vetted through, either some kind of agency of this sort. Which is great. And then states usually have some kind of certification, badging as well, so we're badged all over. But it's a good thing.
Yeah, and a good tip, the EdSearch Product Index, if you all look at that, that's just, it doesn't have all the badges, but it has a lot of badges. There's a page that says validation, so you can see some of the ones that are out there. For example, there's a Future for Privacy Forum, privacy badge. There's a couple badges, some of them are free, some of them are not free, so just letting you know that. It depends on what makes sense for your company, for your organization. That's a good place to start to look at. I feel
What's the name of that site?
you can look up the EdSearch Product Index. And I think we answered this question, why did you decide to get certified with Project Unicorn? But I guess my last question, and then we want to take some questions from the audience. Where should you start as a vendor and as a district? This could be from an interoperability standpoint, this could be from considering certification, but just where would you start?
We get districts calling us, a lot, asking us, what direction should they go with which standard. I say start with a single valid use case, and really understand what you're trying to do. I think a lot of people try to take on the world when they try to do this, and that's why so many of them fail. You have to get the right team in place. You have to have the right people and the commitment, in order to show success.
Yeah, it's a good question. So as a vendor, I think you first have to kind of figure out where do you sit on are you a data producer, consumer, are you both? What standard might make the most sense for you? I think the folks at EdFi Alliance, folks like our organization, are always happy. So at EA, we are like EdFi evangelists, so we're always happy to talk to either data providers or data consumers to sort of unpack, what might it look like for you to consume or produce data for the EdFi API. So folks like us are always happy to talk about it. For districts, I think, like Jen's saying, you have to, when it comes to district success and leveraging like most districts use like one roster standard. That's pretty straightforward. It's like ubiquitous. A lot of apps use it, so like that's just kind of a no-brainer. But when you think about using something like EdFi, it's a bigger deal, right? You're starting to push the vast majority of your data through this, and it's where we've seen success has been either statewide compliance kind of effort, and the question is like, okay, so can you kind of ride behind the statewide compliance for local use? That's what the use case looks like in Texas, which is like, hey, Texas is going statewide modern EdFi, can we actually drag off of that to do district use case type stuff? Big districts, it's probably only going to be successful to do something like this if it's like core to your data modernization strategy, which by the way, I think it could and should be. And then for smaller, medium-sized districts, I think it's about consortia. Most successful, I think the EdFi Alliance is found through your education service agency, and so that's the kind of success factors I'd be looking for.
And just a bonus to this, a great place to start, if you don't know where to start, is to get involved with Project Unicorn. That is what the community is here for. We will pair you with other people who are having the same issues. This is where I met all of these people, everyone that I know in this room. But it's a really good community and a really good place to start. We have a pledge for districts as well as vendors, and we put out resources that will be super helpful in you making these decisions. So we have about 5 minutes. Questions from the audience for our wonderful panelists here.
This is actually for you. Could you talk a little bit about what the process of certification looks like for a vendor?
Sure, yeah. I had a slide prepared for that. So a couple of things this is like an FAQ of a lot of things that I get asked. How much does it cost? There's no cost associated with our certification or our badge. The time investment, it should not take you a while. There is 3 points that we ask for artifacts to prove what you're saying is true. It really just depends what you have prepared already. But most people actually, let me ask you this, how long did it take you to do the Project Unicorn certification?
Oh man, Grace, did you work on it?
I did not, but I
Ross,
don't think
you
it
did
took
it?
too long.
Yeah.
How was it?
It was a little longish. It took me like maybe 4 hours.
Yeah.
4 hours?
But he's a little slow. So like, that part, it's really the evidence gathering that
Yes.
is a little bit time consuming because you have to go find appropriate things, and you share them. Like just that filtering probably was the most time saving. The actual filling out of the forms and submission was very straightforward.
Same.
Okay.
How do you protect the data that's sent from the vendors?
Yeah,
What
so.
do you use it for after it's sent outside of getting on, working?
Yeah, so for the artifacts, I would not send anything that is, has PII. People usually send us like demo data. They send us screenshots of the demo data, or they'll blank out some of the information, or they'll send us screen recordings. Or a really good thing to send is, if you have available these kind of like guides of how to get your tech directors or the people who you're working with the district, how to get them set up. That usually is super helpful and gives those artifacts. What the process is, if you go on the site, you'll see it's really just that rubric broken into questions, and you're just self-assessing on the rubric. And then there's 3 portions where we ask to show that evidence. And then the scoring is tiered, so you don't need all 4s to get a tier 4, you just need mostly of that number. And also, it's a feedback loop. Like, there's no secrets here. I received the application. I'm gonna look over it. I'm just reviewing what you put. If I have any questions, I will email you. It's not gonna be like, oh, you get a 1 and that's it. We go back and forth.
You're not using that data for any other purposes?
No.
And that's a 1-year certification?
It's just until the next rubric comes out.
Okay.
We ask that those who got certified under an old rubric, they get certified under the new one.
How often do you do that?
There's not a new rubric right now, but I do think we will probably be updating it in the next year or so. But there's no like legit timeline on how often we update the rubric.
Appreciate it.